In 1885, Thomas Edison first visited Fort Myers and purchased this property for his family's winter retreat. The Edisons would vacation here until Thomas's death in 1931. In 1947, Mrs. Edison deeded the property to the city of Fort Myers.
Nobody else had really read an incredible book about Fort Myers and the Edison legacy, which he left here. I was a busy lawyer, and I didn't have time to do that. And I had some difficulties health-wise, had to work half days, and I just said, well, the other half of the day I'll write this book. While I was researching the book, I was up in New Jersey. I happened to go to a warehouse where the Charles Edison Fund had some of their original artifacts. And I was in this warehouse and digging into a cardboard box full of original documents and pulled out a handful, and one of them fell on the ground. And I reached over to pick it up, and lo and behold, it was a 16-page handwritten account of the Edison Ford Burroughs trip to the Everglades in 1914. Well, it started out being a very nice day. They left the Edison home on McGregor Boulevard right here in Fort Myers. There were 5 cars, 2 Cadillacs, and 3 Model Ts. They had in their company 3 of the Edison children, Madeline, Charles Edison, and Theodore Edison, and they also had Henry Ford and Clara Ford and Edsel Ford and several other friends. And they went first to LaBelle, and then from LaBelle over to Immokalee, and then out in the woods from there to a place called Rock Lake, which was a very obscure place in the woods. And they set up the 3 tents, which they had all ready for this trip. One was reserved for the Edisons, and it was the tent deluxe. And then they had a tent for the women and a tent for the men. And they had dinner that night, or supper, out in the woods. And all of a sudden, Mina was Edison's wife, she said, everybody should go to their tent now. And before she could finish her statement, it started raining like you've never seen before. And the conversation that went on, and in Madeline's account, is just incredible. Madeline recalled that no sooner had she untangled her toothbrush and entered the large tent than there broke upon us one of those violent and unusual tropical storms that upon rare occasions make life miserable in this part of the country. Like rabbits before a hunting party, the members of the expedition came hurtling one by one into the tent. This is the big tent. By the time the full fury of the storm arrived, the ladies' tent contained everybody but Theodore and the guys. Theodore was later found wrapped in mosquito netting in a pool of water in the Ford tent, while the guys were asleep in the men's tent. He worked here every year. His last project, which started in the mid-20s, was the rubber project. And the reason for that was he had had an experience during World War I of trying to get chemicals that he couldn't get because of World War I and the shipping lanes being surrounded by German U-boats. And he didn't want that shortage to occur again, so he also used rubber in his storage batteries that he manufactured, and he needed a source for them. And he also, Firestone needed rubber for tires, and Ford, because he used a lot of rubber in the basic automobile. And because of all that, they threw in together and started the Edison Botanic Research Corporation, whose purpose was to find a new source of rubber from a vegetable that could be renewed, replanted every year, and therefore, if you had a cutoff from the sources of rubber, you wouldn't be in trouble, and that's what he was working for. He really wasn't working for a final solution for rubber. He was working for the emergency brought on by his experience in World War I. And the only sources we had for rubber back then were in the Far East, and most of them were controlled by the Japanese. Milo wrote tons of personal letters, and she described their marital difficulties, described what they were having for lunch, what they were going to have for supper, and she wrote each one of her children. She wrote letters to her son Charles, saying, "I detest the people down here. I find this place to be rank." And sometime in the early 20s, she did an about-face. She had an epiphany, and she became a part of the town as much as anybody in the town. She was involved in the Plant Guild, president of the Plant Guild, which was an umbrella organization for all the garden clubs in the area.
They always would walk in the garden, and it was fun to come here and eat and then sit on those swings after dinner on the porches and to walk around. She liked to do that, so we would do that. And she loved to ride around and see things. She was interested in everything about her, what was going on in the town and around with different people. She was very curious about that, and anything new that happened, she wanted to know about it and wanted to be involved. She was very, very easy to know and to be with. And she, as I said, she was curious about everything, and she wanted to know what was going on. And we even went into the bar down on Broadway one night because she thought that wondered what was going on, and Sidney took her, and I was with him, and she talked to the owner and to lots of the people that was in there.
Edison died in 1931. She came back in 1932, the year after her husband died. And when she was pulling out of the station on the train, she wrote a letter to Sidney Davis, Burns' husband. "Dear Sidney, it was extremely difficult to pull out of Fort Myers. One of the hardest things, if not the hardest, since Deary has left me. Some way he seemed very near to me there, different from any other place. We are attached to those in Fort Myers in a different way from others."